Let me introduce our guests and thank them for giving up their Friday afternoon to come and talk with us. Alison Pollack is a friend of the show and friend of mine, and a frequent winner of the Nikon Small World competition. She's a photographer of fungus and slime molds, and her photographs are going to speak for themselves. She's here today to tell you all about her photography, how she does it, and hopefully give you all the secrets you know to do the same thing, including where to find these things. And Rik is here to make sure that we all remain rigorously scientific throughout. Thanks to everybody for coming, and thanks to Mike for volunteering to help out there in the crowd. I'm going to turn it right over to Alison to kick things off for us. Alison?
Let's start with a photo. Photos are always fun. Not that photo. Let's start with, well, we might as well start with that photo. That's my favorite photo. That is a species of slime mold called Lamproderma, probably Lamproderma scintillans. It is my favorite slime mold photo that I have done in the last, I guess it's about 4 years now that I've been photographing these organisms. We have a very short rainy season where I live. It's only about 3 or 4 months if we're lucky. It seems to be getting worse over time. But last year we had a freak storm in October, early for the rainy season, that dumped 16 inches of rain in one 24-hour period. And after that, which is, even for our standards, that's a lot. So after that, and it's very variable. Where I live, there are extreme microclimates, but near where I live, it was 16 inches of rain. 20 miles away, it might have been 5 inches of rain. So a few days later, I went to the very wet woods and started turning over leaves and looking for things under logs. And I found what turned into this gorgeous collection of this species, or this genus of slime molds, called Lamproderma. They are stunning. This photograph took me probably 40 hours to do, the longest I have spent doing any photograph, because I was trying many different angles, lots of different kinds of lighting. Slime molds, when they're fresh, are moist and highly reflective, so diffusion can be pretty tricky. Anyway, I love this photo. This photo placed 5th this year in the Nikon Small World competition. But let's go back to the very beginning. This is the very first slime mold that I saw, and it's what started everything. This photo was taken with my phone. It's probably an iPhone 5, 4 years ago or something. I'm pretty behind in my phones. And I was hiking, and I saw this little cluster of yellow blobby things on a redwood tree that's about the size of my thumb. And I thought, what in the world is that? And so I took a photograph of it. And I came home and I did a reverse Google image search, which is a pretty cool thing to do. If you don't know how to do that, check it. You can upload a photo and Google will look for photos like that. And it very quickly found and told me that this was a slime mold called Leocarpus fragilis, sometimes called insect egg slime mold. And I'd never heard of a slime mold before. What in the world is a slime mold? So that was about 4 o'clock when I started, and I was reading and reading, and it went down a 12-hour rabbit hole. I didn't stop to eat or do anything. And at 4 in the morning, I finally said, I have to go to bed. And I was instantly hooked. I had been doing landscape photos before then, and I immediately switched. I had a macro lens, which I hadn't used very much, but I immediately switched to looking for and photographing slime molds. I'd already been looking at photographing some mushrooms, not with fancy equipment, but just with my camera. But I thought, I have to find and photograph these things. So that started a journey, as I said, about 4 years ago. Maybe I'll show a few more photos before we start to talk about some of the technical things. This is a pretty common slime mold called Trichia decipiens. They come in, they're clustered. So you can see they're very, very small. They're about 2 to 3 millimeters tall. That's kind of big for most of the slime molds I photograph. But they're they come in clusters, bright clusters. So you can actually see them as you're walking, as opposed to looking for most other slime molds. You need to be on the ground on your hands and knees and looking very closely. They have this glass-like stem that it's just gorgeous. It looks like a sculpture. And this is Didymium squamulosum, which is the very first photograph that I did focus stacking with a microscope objective. So I was totally blown away by the detail that a microscope objective could reveal to me. I also like to photograph mushrooms. I do maybe half my photography in the field, certainly in the winter when we have rains, and then about half in my home studio, meaning a table. This is a marasmialis, I think. I just really like the gill pattern. This is done in the field. I'm a sucker for gills. This is a slime mold called Physarum cinereum, and my husband likes to call it alien writing. It looks like some code from aliens, he thinks. But it's kind of fun to find. It's on a wood chip. It was in a pile of wood chips. It's about the size, the whole picture is about the size of my thumbnail. It's in a big pile of wood chips in Berkeley. Very small little mushroom. I think this is Marginata gallerina marginata, but I can't remember. I'm not very good at mushroom ID. I'm much better at slime molds. Again, this is pretty small, and how small it is here. So I post on Instagram and Facebook, and when I post, I try to put a scale photo as much as I can. Sometimes in the field, I just get too excited and I forget what I'm doing, and I get home and I'm darn, I forgot to do a scale photo, but most of the times I try. I have been able to travel to a few other interesting places around the world. This is a photograph of a tropical mushroom called cocaina. I can't remember the species name, but the genus is cocaina. And this was in the jungle in Colombia about 3 years ago. And it's this gorgeous cup. And there was this dappled sun in the trees, and I was sort of waiting and waiting and hoping that I might be able to catch it when the sun was just going to the base of the cup. Interesting when I move my cursor, okay, to the base of the cup. And I did manage to catch it, that little bit of light at the base of the cup. I really like. Anybody who goes looking for mushrooms is likely to recognize this. These guys are called eyelash cups, or scutellinia, pretty common around here. This is my husband's favorite picture. He likes the forest reflected in the drops. This was also after heavy rain in Point Reyes National Seashore, which is only about 30 minutes from my house. And I really love the way the droplets do reflect the forest behind. In addition to what most people think of as mushrooms, fruiting bodies, I also like to photograph tiny, 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 different kind of fungi, cup fungi, or ascomycetes. There are thousands, probably tens of thousands of them, very, very, very tiny, hard to identify, but always fun to find. And I think these are Amicodisca, but I can't remember for sure. I like this because it has the bubbles on them. And this is, oh, what's the name? Clitocybe. No, Samacybe. This is Samacybe. These mushrooms always have these sort of sugary looking crystals on them. These are baby Samacybe. And here's a photo for scale. That's the tip of a pen. So they're really quite small. I showed you this photo, which is my favorite photo, but until I took that photo, this was my favorite photo. And this is a little troop of Didymium squamulosum as a slime mold, and I call it lemmings to the sea. They're on a piece of wood, a decomposing piece of wood. It almost looks like porcelain. And this, I've been to Alaska several times, and this was in an Alaskan forest a couple of years ago. You also find in Alaska lots of tiny coprinoid type mushrooms. This is a real cutie, and the substrate is a pretty common substrate in Alaska. That is a moose turd. And we find a lot of fun little tiny fungi on moose turds. Slime molds come in every color of the rainbow. This is one of my favorites. I've only seen this blue once. This is a Cribraria. I'm not sure of the species, but it's a Cribraria slime mold. And slime molds change color. It's one of the many, many really cool things about slime molds. They change color many times in their short life cycle. This one will start as black, actually white when it's very small, changes to black. It gets stems, and then the black changes to sort of almost a pale gray. And then this pale gray changes to this gorgeous bright blue that you see here. And then as it matures, it changes to, as you can see up in the top left, the cursor doesn't work in the picture for some reason, but the top left, there's a tan one. That's a more mature fruiting body, not fully mature. And then that outer layer dries out. The outer layer is called the peridium. It holds the spores. It dries out, and then the spores are revealed to the wind to be dispersed by the wind, or perhaps by animals who eat them, or by people who walk by, or by a leaf that brushes by. One of my favorite ways to find slime molds is to find them on the edges of a leaf or the edges of a piece of wood. But edges of a leaf is definitely my favorite. I've only found it a few times, but they're really spectacular when you can find them that way. This is a immature slime mold. Most of them, yeah, a good chunk of them start white and then they change colors. This one will eventually turn blue. Another really pretty one, I think this is Physarum auriscalpulum, hard one to pronounce. Just gorgeous colors. It's growing on moss, so you can tell how small it is because that's a tiny itty bitty bit of moss. So slime molds grow on mostly on decomposing organic matter, but sometimes, as in here, they grow on mushrooms. So this is a very common mushroom fungus called Sterium hirsutum, and the particular slime mold here is called Badhamia utricularis. It is a really cool slime mold because it is just gorgeous colors. It has a yellow plasmodium. Oh, I should actually explain plasmodium. So when slime molds start their life cycle, they creep along the log. Let's see if I can find a plasmodium here. They creep along the log, and so this is a plasmodium, and so it's slimy, it's sticky to the touch, which is why these things are called slime molds, but it's kind of a funny name. So Myxomycete is the actual botanical name, and myxo means mucus or slime, and mycete means mushroom. Because when they were first observed or described, scientists thought that they were a fungus. And so it's sort of a slimy mushroom. So they call them myxomycetes. I like to call them myxos for short. Yeah, so that's my favorite
Alison,
term. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Are these multicellular or multinucleate?
Multinucleate. They are single-celled organisms. So before you, the plasmodium is when you first see them. Before you see them when they're spores, they're single cells. And then a spore will find and merge with a compatible spore, and it becomes a single cell with 2 nuclei. And then those merge with another, and they become a single cell with 4 nuclei, etc. So they are single-celled, which is pretty amazing.
When they become multicellular, does each cell form a fruiting body or
okay, so I'm not a scientist on this, but my understanding is that they are single-celled multinuclei organisms, which is pretty
sorry
astonishing.
to interrupt. They're beautiful though.
No, but I'm happy to answer questions. So when you first see a slime mold in the forest or wherever you're looking, it will look like this, and it it usually expands in this fan-like pattern here, and it pulses. So if you set your phone to do time-lapse photography or just watch it, it pulses in and out over time, which is pretty cool. So it has this plasmodium, and it's searching the wood or the soil or wherever it is, the plant, for food. It tends to feed on yeast and algae and tiny bits of fungi and tiny bits of bacteria. And then either when it runs out of food or the environmental conditions are right, the fruiting bodies arise out of this plasmodium, and this plasmodial slime completely disappears. There are little tracks you can see on the wood, but basically the plasmodium disappears and the fruiting bodies form, which is pretty awesome to see. Alan, should I go back to some more photos, or do you want to do a little chatting?
Well, I was wondering if there were any questions from the crowd. Michael, let me know in a minute if there are. How did you get so deep into this? Did you have a mentor, or how did I have been out and looked for them, found them, photographed them, and I get the appeal, but you've thrown everything into this. What's the motivation?
They're gorgeous. It's as simple as, I just think they're beautiful. I've always loved like tiny details in nature. I'm a small person, maybe that's why, I don't know. But even 10 years ago, before I retired, I thought I would try my hand at macro photography and write a book called Details in Nature. So my proclivity is looking at small things. But then when that day I started reading about them and looking at photos on the web, and there weren't very good photos at the time, by the way. Now there's tons, but there weren't very good ones. But what I saw just blew me away. The colors, the variety, all in this little itty bitty tiny body. And my friends know that when I get into something, I really get into it. So
Well,
I dove
one
in.
other question that I mean, as we look at these pictures, which are utterly amazing, and start to get a feel for how tiny these are, as a frame of reference, tell us your basic photography setup, how you can capture these things that seem to be growing in the tiny cracks in the ground. What do you lie on the ground to photograph these?
I do. I look for them. I'm sitting on the ground. If you can't find slime molds walking in the forest, there are a few that are big enough to see, but most of them are so tiny, you really have to stop. And what I like to tell people is, if the woods are wet, I can go to a wet forest and sit down, and within 5 feet radius of myself, I'm guaranteed to find something of interest to photograph, either a slime mold or a tiny mushroom or one of these tiny cup fungi, these ascomycetes. You just stop. So I pick up twigs. I rotate twigs. Let's do a little gear here. Oops, let's do a little gear here.
So for you, going out to photograph slime molds is a very deliberate, planned event.
Yeah.
You don't just stick a camera in the bag just in case you see one. You go out and look for them.
No, I go out for a minimum of 3 or 4 hours, but I'll go out all day if I can. I take snacks and a lunch with me, take water, take all my camera gear. I'll show you some of the fun tools that I use to look for things and to photograph things. I look for what looks like nicely decomposing logs. If it's a freshly cut log, it's probably not going to have slime molds on it. They like really well decomposed logs. And after a while, you get a sense and you can spot those more easily.
Why do you leave the garden if they're so ubiquitous? Why do you have to drive anywhere?
Because I live in California and we have a drought for several years, and we're not allowed.
Nobody told me.
Not allowed to water our gardens. So I have no garden. Actually, I should say I have no garden, but last year, after the rains stopped, a friend of mine came, and she has what I say magnifying lenses for eyes, and she poked through the leaves in my garden, and she found 10 species of dried Myxos, including an extremely rare one. So you can find them anywhere, but my garden is not conducive. I mean, I don't water anything. They need moisture. So
Is it a
in the
big
winter,
forest you go to? Is it a hardwood forest?
good question. So, California has where I live in near San Francisco, north of San Francisco. We have magnificent redwood forests,
Redwood,
just
yeah.
gorgeous redwood forests. But I don't find too many slime molds. There are a few that certainly like redwoods, but not that many. So I will either go to a mixed redwood forest or just a mixed hardwood forest. You tend to find more where there are hardwoods than conifers. And even in bushes, I mean, basically they like shady, dark places. Any place you find mushrooms, almost, you're going to find slime molds as well. You can even find them in there's a particular species that you'll find in the middle of a sunny field. But mostly I look for forest. Creek beds are another good place to go. I go on trails to get to where I'm going, but then I'm almost always going off trail, mostly because I don't want to be sitting in the middle of a trail with a camera. And I also want to be by myself and not be disturbed by what I'm doing.
Talking about cameras, when did you switch away from a full frame camera? I didn't know you shot Micro Four Thirds.
Yeah. So when I started, I had a Canon something 6, the baby Canon full frame camera, 6D. I had a Canon 6D when I started, and I switched to Sony. Probably I've been using that for a while, but I wasn't very happy. I just didn't think the quality of the photos was that good. And I was looking at comparisons between that and some of the Sony cameras, and it really blew me away how much better the dynamic range was on the Sonys. With the Canon, I had to do HDR for everything. I had to do three different lighting setups for everything to get the full dynamic range. So I got the Sony and I no longer had to do that. So I had a Sony full frame camera, which is now what I use in my studio. That's an A7R2. And so I would be out in the field with my Sony full frame camera and manually focus stacking. So anything between 30 and 100 pictures manually by rotating the focus knob ever so slightly is pretty tedious. And you have to have really good fingers to do that and really good sensitivity. And as Rick and others well know, if your steps aren't pretty uniform, it doesn't always work out so well. So I heard somehow about these Micro Four Thirds cameras that had built-in focus bracketing in the camera. And I waited for Sony to do that. I waited 2 years for Sony to add that to their cameras. I'm still waiting for Sony to add that to their cameras. They are the only major camera manufacturer that does not have focus bracketing built into their cameras. I don't know why.
Hey, you guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have questions coming in fast and furious. Do you want to do some participant questions or
Let's do
on?
that, Mike. Let's take a brief pause and get some questions answered.
Maybe I won't. I'll stop the screen share, Alan.
Yeah, that'd be great.
No, where is it? It's disappeared on me now.
You can leave it on.
I got it.
Okay.
All righty. Several questions are coming in about how do you do your lighting? So that's
okay. Let's go back to the screen share then.
That was quick.
That was quick. Okay. Let me back up a little bit. So in the field, I started to say I change something here. Okay, I had a Sony and I was doing manual focus stacking, and I stopped waiting for Sony to come out with a camera that does focus stacking. They're still not doing it. Apparently they won't. So I heard about the Olympus, which also has a great macro lens. So this is now, and has been for probably 1.5 years, my field camera. I love it. It has a really good 60 millimeter macro lens. That's 120 millimeter. It's a 2x crop factor. So that's 120 millimeter equivalent in a full frame camera. And to that, I can add either extension tubes this is a 10, this is a 16 miller extension tube in the middle. Sometimes I add 3 extension tubes, and I also use what's Raynox 250, which is a diopter that attaches to the end of the lens. The Raynox 250 is a really good way, once you have a macro lens, to sort of step up the level of magnification. It's incredibly good given its price. It's maybe $90 or $100, and the 250 will give you about 2.5 times more magnification. There's also a 150, which gives you about 1.5 more times, and the quality is really excellent. And then for lighting, to answer the question, first of all, in the field, I really don't like to use lighting. I try wherever possible to use natural light. So slime molds are tiny. I carry a good pocket knife with me, and sometimes I will cut it out of its substrate and move it to somewhere where there's a little bit more light. And I also will use longer exposures. So a 1/2 second exposure in the field is not uncommon for me, even a second. I'm on a tripod. Most of the time the wind can affect them. So if it's really windy, actually don't even go out if it's really windy. But most of the time I don't use any lighting. If I do use lighting, I use these 2 little lights, mostly the one on the right. The manufacturer is Ulanzi. I guess it's Chinese. I got these online, and this little wand actually is a really terrific light. It has colors, but I just use daylight, and it's dimmable. So you can add or subtract as much light as you want. And that little cover is actually quite a good diffuser. I also carry a small diffuser, and I sometimes use that as well. But most of the time I don't use any lighting in the field. Mike, you want to?
Yeah. What I'm going to do, just so the audience understands, is if I jump around, it doesn't mean we're not necessarily going to get to your question. It's just the ones I think are kind of on everyone's minds. We'll do first. So we're going to go a little out of order to what you see in the chat. I thought this was a really good one from Ariane. What is the best way to identify slime molds?
By identify, I'm not sure if the person is asking identify to genus and species, or see if you have a slime mold.
Well, let's see here. I'm not sure either. Maybe you can clarify that.
Well, I'll answer it in both ways.
Okay.
To know whether it is or isn't a slime mold is just a question of seeing more and more pictures and getting used to what they look like. There is a group on Facebook called Slime Mold Identification and Appreciation, which is a terrific group to learn about slime molds. You're smiling, Rick. Go join it, Rick.
Ariane is asking genus and species, so I guess
okay.
That's how you would do that. Yeah.
Okay. For genus and species, sometimes, let me back up. There are about 1,000 species of slime mold that have been documented. So that's a small number, a lot smaller than mushrooms, which is with my age and diminishing memory, it's a lot easier to memorize those than tens of thousands of mushrooms. Anyway, there's about 1,000 of them. I'd say maybe 10% can be identified with just a photo. Most of them you need to do microscopy. So you have to take a microscope and look at all of the morphological characteristics, the outer layer. You have to break apart this when it's dry and mature. You have to break it apart and look at the spores and the threads that hold the spores. So you have to do all this with a microscope. And then there are various keys and papers out there. I will answer a question that's very common, which is what's a good guidebook for slime molds? And unfortunately, the answer is there isn't a good guidebook for slime molds. There are some elementary handbooks. I sent Alan some links, which he'll post with a YouTube video that includes a couple of books, beginner books on slime molds, one from Australia and one from an author in the United States. And once you get past those beginner books, there are a number of books on slime molds, but they're very technical and very expensive. And the best one is no longer available, unfortunately. There isn't any really good book on slime molds. You know, someday maybe I'll do a book, but I just would much rather be out in the woods photographing right now. So if you're trying to ID slime, if you're willing to do the microscopy, I did put some links that Alan will put with the show, but if you do the microscopy and you have pictures of both the where you found it, how you found it, and the microscopy, you can post those to the Facebook group, which has world experts who will typically ID slime molds that people post. It's a really good place to figure out what they are.
Yeah, lots of people are interested in the conditions. When's a good time to collect them? Like someone's asking, you speak of rain, wet forest, etc. Is there a window of opportunity after a hard rain that is ideal for finding subjects in a mixed forest? And people are interested, like, so in conditions, how do you transport them? What are you doing once you get them at home?
Okay, let's answer the first set of questions. So let's say first of all about where they are. So the most common place to find slime molds is in temperate forests, wet forests. I like to say a wet forest is my happy place. So temperate forests, hardwoods seem to be better, as I said. They need moisture for sure. So if you're lucky to be in an area like England, where it rains all the time, you can find slime molds year round. For me, we only have rain a few months of the year, so that's when I find them. Slime molds are also in snowmelt. So if you live anywhere near the mountains and you can go to snowmelt areas in spring, you can find slime molds. And my very favorite species, genus, which is Lamproderma, those beautiful blue ones, iridescent blue ones, that's the most common genus in snowmelt. So where I live, I look in the rainy season, and then once things dry up, I head to the mountains, and you just keep going higher and higher in elevation over a month or two, and I can find Myxos in snowmelt for a couple of months. So a heavy rain, if it's a really heavy rain, will probably destroy anything, except for the ones that are tucked under logs or under a pile of leaves or something. So if it's a really heavy rain, you probably want to wait for at least a few days. In where I live, I start looking after we get a decent rain, say an inch or a few days with a half an inch. I start looking typically 2 to 3 days after that. If you're in an area where it rains year round and things are just generally damp, then you're likely to be able to find slime molds all the time. Did I answer the questions, Mike, or did I miss part of it?
Yeah, well, okay, now people are also interested, like, can you harvest them and grow them indoors? And what's sort of like the time frame for when is the best time to photograph them in their life stage?
Okay, I just realized I didn't answer one question, and then I'll answer those. How do I take them home from the woods? So this is a simple little, it's not exactly a tackle box, maybe like an arts and crafts little box. And you can't quite see it, but each box has a number on it. And I also take with me into the woods a notebook. And in this notebook, I write down where I was, what I'm photographing, what the substrate was, what species I think it is. I write down the location, and I try to remember to take a phone photo because that gives me GPS coordinates as well as a scale photo. But and also write down what lighting I use, because I'm always I'm not very good at flash. I don't use flash at all, but I really prefer natural light. So I'm still practicing with artificial light. And then I take them home in this little container. So it's pretty small, but slime molds are pretty small. This is filter paper, literally Petri dish filter paper. For me, it's worked out really well. It's thick paper, and so it can absorb a lot of stuff if things are wet, or if I want them to stay wet, I just use a spray mister and I spray the paper, and I gently put the slime mold in the box, and I try to find moss or something to hold it in place, because this is going to be bobbing up and down in my backpack. What was the next question, Mike?
Sort of like time frames and the life stage, the optimal times to photograph them, and any, tips on that.
Well, yeah. For me, optimal time to photograph them is when they're pretty, which is all the time. But I mean, they change. So They will change if you take them away from their natural environment. I learned this the hard way. There are some slime molds that change, well, many slime molds change color in this. Physarum sometimes go through this gorgeous yellow and pink stage. And 3 times I was out in the woods 20 minutes from my house and I photographed these gorgeous yellow ones, but I wanted to photograph them with my gear at home. And so I very carefully packaged them in my little container and moistened them. But by the time I got home, 25 minutes later, they were already changed. So I can't give a general statement, but I can say that, well, yeah, I guess in general, slime molds don't like to be removed from their natural environment. So they will either change much faster or perhaps just abort their growth if you remove them from their environment. So I'm slowly getting, well, I'm getting better at it over time. When I get home, I keep them in this little container, which keeps them moist until I'm ready to photograph them. And if you photograph them and you take them out into a much warmer house than they were in and you put a lot of light on them, they can also change pretty fast. I've done many stacks at home where things were changing too fast, and so make lemonade out of lemon. So sometimes I turn it into a video to show how the slime mold is changing over time. You can grow them at home. I forgot to bring an example of that. I have something here. Okay, you can grow them at home very easily. You can just take a piece of woody debris or leaf litter or anything from the forest, either wet or dry, and this is a food storage container from the grocery store, okay? And so you put your bits of wood, actually there is some wood in here. This is ready to be, you take your bits of wood and you put it on a paper towel in the bottom of this container, and then you pour water over it. Distilled water is best, but distilled water is best, or boiled water. Tap water will be okay, but there are sometimes chemicals in tap water that aren't good for the Myxos. And pour the water on it and leave it soaking in the water, the piece of wood or the leaves, for 12 to 24 hours, and then pour out the water and cover it and put it on a shelf out of direct sunlight and away from any heater vent or anything like that. And then check it every day. And usually you will get slime molds growing on it. I have personally not been that successful, but that's because I've only tried them in the summer when it's really hot. I don't have air conditioning, and so I get mold. But if you do this, if you have a cold basement or you have a nice, cool, shady spot that they can sit in that's somewhat like the forest conditions they were from, you should have a lot of luck growing them.
We've got a couple of questions about the use of microscope objectives, and maybe talk about your equipment, your workflow on that, your technique.
Okay, let's finish. Oh, that's the field year. All right, so let me go back to screen share here.
People are also asking about magnification settings and things like that.
Okay, let's go back.
That and stack depth.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is my study table. This is a clean version of my study table. I had to really clean it up for this. So I have 3 main things here. On the right side is a dissecting scope, and that goes up to about 90x magnification. I bought that originally because I had done a number of stacks of very high magnification stacks of slime mold, only to find that there was a speck of dirt that really ruined it. And so I thought, I'll just buy a dissecting microscope and then I can look at things before I photograph them, they're not that expensive. You can get a pretty decent one for maybe $250 here in the United States. And it's fascinating. And that's where I discovered springtails, which are awesome little creatures, adorable little cartoon bugs. So I always look at things in the dissecting scope first, and I pick out what I want to photograph, and I try to see which angle I want to photograph it on. In the middle is my compound microscope, which I just purchased a couple of months ago, and I've only done a little because there's only so many hours in the day and I somehow still have to sleep. But I really want to be able to do much more ID than I have been doing. And there's my camera set up on the
Alison,
left.
what
Yeah.
camera is that on your microscope?
Okay, we'll go there. That is my Sony A7R2. That's the original camera I had for the field that I was doing manual focus stacking with the Sony 90mm macro lens.
You get full frame coverage with that?
I do.
Really?
Actually, that's not what's on there now. Okay, but see, I was using the 90mm macro in the field, not here. I'll show you what I use here.
Okay.
But before we get to the microscope objective, I want to talk about, this is the Laowa 25mm 2.5 to 5x, which some people think is terrible. I think it's terrific. I have probably half the shots I post, well, not half, but a good number of the shots I post are with this lens. I think it's really, really good. It is sitting on my very fancy piece of plywood, which I found in a friend's garage. I have a stack shot there. I just want to explain a little bit about this rig. So unfortunately, my cursor, can you see my cursor?
Yeah,
okay.
We do.
So at the bottom here is a two-sided Arca Swiss rail that I got from a company called Hedgnar, I think, something like that. They make specialized equipment and it's incredibly high quality. And what I really like about this is that there's a thick, the screw there is thick. It's really easy to handle. It's double-sided because I want to be able to move my entire rig backwards and forwards depending on what lens I'm using. On top of that, only for the Laowa, this is the ball head I use for the field work. That's a Kirk, I forget which one, BH1 or something, ball head. And then on top of that is the stack shot. And then on top of that is my Sony with the Laowa lens. So here I use the ball head, and that allows me to angle the camera any which way I want, which is great. So that gets me up to 5x. Then I use a 10x microscope objective, which is the Mitutoyo or MIDI 10x. It's shown, just because I was lazy that day, on top of the ball head again, but I don't do that. When I use the microscope objective, I don't use the ball head. I use the stack shot directly without the ball head. So I only have one plane that I can always go on. And at first I was using, I think I started using my Canon 70 to 200mm lens at the 200mm end as the tube for the microscope objective. You need, for this microscope objective, you need 200mm of a tube to be able to focus it. So I started with that, but I just didn't like the setup very much. The adapter that I had for the Sony was a little bit rickety. So I bought the Wii Macro tube, which and then used that with the Raynox 150. And I didn't think the quality was as good as it should be. And I was in the process of trying to figure that out when a friend of mine said, I have this 200mm Nikon f4 macro lens that I'm not using. You want to borrow it like for a long time? And so he gave me his Nikon. Thank you, Bruce. He will watch this eventually. He gave me
Bruce what?
I'm not going to say his last name. Let's just say that I've spent many hours teaching him everything I do. So
Alison, I would like to ask Rik a question about this setup, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Rik, that objective is sitting right on the front element of that lens. Is that how you would set that up with a 200mm prime?
Probably, mainly because it's easy. There's variation from lens to lens as to what the optimum separation is between the objective and the tube lens. For that particular lens, I have no idea. So the first thing I would do is make it short and see if it works.
Even
make
though
it short? How do you make it short? I can't shorten it.
You're
short.
already short.
Yeah.
The alternative would be to add extension between the tube lens and the objective.
Yeah, I haven't tried that. I think I read in somewhere, and maybe it was on your forum, I don't remember, that people tried that and it seemed to work better with the direct connection.
Well, again, it varies depending on the tube lens. The lenses that are built with intent to be tube lenses by Nikon and ITL and so forth are specifically designed to prefer lots of space between there because they stick in beam splitters and stuff like that. But standard telephoto lenses, my read is they work a little bit better with no added space like you have, except if you.
And this is a prime.
Yeah, yeah. Zooms often have problems with vignetting, so primes are more likely to work well. Sometimes you get loss of contrast due to light bouncing back and forth between the objective and the front element of the lens. And in that case, having some extra space can improve the contrast.
I'll try it. How much space would you recommend trying? 50? Less?
Try 50, sure.
You know, I think it's easy enough once you have your extenders and rings, just run a bunch of tests because the flare, or like Alan's halo article, well, this is a different halo, but that is just a buzzkill on a lot of this work, and it's so easy to prevent. And the other thing, whether you go with almost touching the front element of this beautiful Nikon 200 millimeter or do the extension, is take a look at the back of the lens, and either with, you know, blackout tape or carefully doing it with any other flocking material, at least, even if it's touching the lens, black it out.
Right.
Make a little make a donut or something if you have to.
Right. I've done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was really the reason for my question. Was I've been plagued with contrast issues with higher magnification objectives with a higher numeric aperture, of getting light in there and losing contrast. And I know that you have some really bright subjects on really dark backgrounds, and just wondering how that was working. I love that lens. I love that combination. In fact, it's probably just jealousy that motivated that question.
that is probably one of the greatest, you know, prime macro lenses ever made. And,
yep.
Yeah. And Bruce said, "Yeah, I'm not using it. You wanna borrow it?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are getting questions about the type of objectives. I already answered that. These are, in this situation, it's always an infinity objective that you're going to want to use. So
I'm not sure that's the case. Rick, you want to answer that question? Is it always an infinity?
Well, if you're using tube lenses, I assume that. But if not, you can go direct to the sensor with a regular.
Right.
Rick can clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah, even with an infinity objective, particularly at relatively low magnifications like 5 or 10x, you have some freedom to adjust the focus of the rear lens, which will also change the focus in front and to some extent the magnification, depending on, you know, like if you've got a Raynox on a bellows, you can really shorten that rear distance quite a lot and reduce the magnification as well. There are lots of trade-offs on that. One technique that people sometimes use, which works pretty well, is to stick the objective on front of a focusable rear lens like you have here, and then do focus stepping by adjusting the focus ring on the rear lens. It, strictly speaking, it takes the microscope objective away from the focus point where it was designed to operate best. But the world is full of trade-offs, and that particular one seems to be a good trade-off for low magnification objectives.
Yeah.
Does that not somehow affect the color correction, though? I mean, are you going to get fringing doing that?
I've never encountered a change in the color correction. If you push it too far, you certainly do pick up extra aberrations, particularly spherical aberration, which kills your contrast for fine details.
I think we should still clarify for people, because they're asking about a regular objective versus an infinity focus objective, and what are the uses of both. Obviously, these are everything we've talked about so far is an infinity objective, but so the question would be, with a regular objective, non-infinity.
You mean a finite objective?
Yeah, fine. Sorry, finite.
I'll let you go for it, Rik.
Okay. So let me back up even farther. There are two main categories of objectives. One of them, called an infinity objective, is designed to work in combination with another lens that completes the image formation. And that rear lens used by itself is designed to be focused at infinity, hence the term infinity objective. The other class of objective, called finite objectives, are intended to be used by themselves with nothing but air between the objective and the camera sensor. Those are intended to be used on hard extension tubes or bellows or something like that. The only way to tell what kind of an objective you have is to look at the specifications, which are printed on the side of the objective. But yeah, they need to be used, each one in the way that it was designed to be used. So if it's infinity, you need to stick it in front of a tube lens like this, because if you don't, you will lose contrast and image quality. Likewise, if you stick a finite objective on the end of a lens like this, you will lose contrast and quality in the fine detail.
The other really important thing about any objective is to make sure that you have a good enough working distance between the objective and your subject. So the mid-tutorial ones are excellent in that. This lens has 33 millimeters of, I think it's 33, working distance. So that's enough space, plenty enough space to get some lighting in there.
Yeah, let's finish up the lens questions. It says, can you apply any microscope objective to a lens, or do you need an objective specifically designed for cameras? So I think, the people are thinking these are microscope objectives for use on microscopes, but we've got a whole world of users here using them in applications like this. So
right. So the most important thing is the working distance. The overwhelming majority of microscope objectives have a very short working distance, like 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters. You can't use that for this kind of photography because there's no way to light your subject. Exactly. Unless you literally you're taking photos through the microscope, literally with a microscope. So you can't use an ordinary microscope objective. You have to use a long working distance or extra long working distance objective. And those are not normally on microscopes that people are using in their homes and labs.
Great.
Yeah, they're commonly the kind of objectives that are used in industry, like these ones, for inspection purposes, that are designed for, with a long working distance, are the ones that are commonly chosen by photographers. But there aren't that many, and they get just incredibly expensive after you go through the mid-tutorials. I mean, just 3 times the price.
Yeah, I will say I'll say this for Rik, the best place to learn about microscope objectives and how to use them for this kind of photography is on a forum that Rik has set up called Photomacrography. And Alan, that needs to be added to the links as well. That's when I first started. I think it was a Charles Krebs photo I saw of butterfly scales or something that he'd done outside a microscope. And I thought, really? You can do that? I wonder if I can do that to Myxos. And I started looking for sources on where to read, and I found Rik's forum, and there is a ton of incredibly useful information there. Be prepared to spend many hours of reading. Rik, more than anybody else, will post extremely long and very, very detailed, wonderful technical posts telling you more than you want to know about all this. There's also a really good search feature on that forum. So kudos, Rik. I read that read through there a little bit every day for probably 3 months before I got up the nerve to put a post and said, I want to do this, and this is what I think I need.
Well, you didn't really need to wait quite that long. We have a very friendly and I hope helpful membership in the forum. So yeah, if you can't find what you need just by reading, then just register as a user and post a question, and someone will answer you.
And someone will always answer you. It's amazing. I posted this and I thought, oh, maybe I'll get a response in a week. And I woke up the next morning at 6 o'clock and there were 3 long, detailed answers.
Okay, there's some more lens questions, but I think we should mix it up a little bit. Enrico is asking, the process of stacking is done with what software? Zareen, Helicon, or question mark?
Is this Enrico Bonino by any chance?
It sure is.
Hi, Enrico. He's a fellow who does really cool photos of insects in fossilized amber, if that's the right term. And I've
Hey,
chatted with him.
Enrico.
I've chatted with him online a fair bit. I've told Rick this. I started using Helicon. I don't remember why. And I now have Zareen Stacker. I use both. So no matter what I'm doing, I always do everything in Helicon first, primarily because it's way, way, way faster. So I can get an idea if the stack that I want is good enough for me to keep working on it. If it's something, sometimes the Helicon stack is fine, but these days, probably at least 70% of the time, once I've done it in Helicon, then I do the same stack in Zareen. It takes a lot longer, but it's worth it. And oddly, more and more over time, I think the color rendition in Zareen is far better. It's subtle, but to me, it's really noticeable. It's far better in Zareen DMAP than it is in the parallel in Helicon. But Helicon's a lot faster. So if you can manage it, I'd say both. If you can only take one package, for sure, get Zareen.
But how many stacking software manufacturers are going to take the time and care and effort to answer your questions in detail the way Rik does?
Within hours.
Yeah.
Within hours.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's clear. I mean, definitely. I mean, I highly recommend Zareen above the other one. I just happen to have started with Helicon, but over time, I've moved more and more and more to Zareen. And now almost anything I post with a microscope objective is processed through Zareen. Also, the retouching tools are terrific in Zareen. Absolutely terrific. You can either, you can take, if you've got these halo problems or foreground, background problems, you can very easily stack a subset of your photos and then use that to retouch. It's really cool. Kudos, Rik.
Talking about photos, I hate to interrupt this, but I want to see more photos, Alison.
Okay, let me just finish the gear in the studio.
You're going to run out of time.
While we're here, just a real quick finish on the gear in the studio. All right, now I'll go to photos. Okay. Where were we? Let's see. Okay, I think I ended here. Oops, can you see it? The photo?
Yes.
Okay. This is a tiny little myxomycete called, no, it's a fungus. Sorry, it's a tiny little mushroom called a lacnum. It's the genus, and it has these little hairs which either attract or it's from the mushroom. I'm not sure. You almost always, if it's fresh, you almost always find little water droplets on them, which I just think make them so pretty. This is in the field. This is neither a mushroom nor a Myxo, but it is absolutely one of my favorite photos. I was wondering if anybody has any idea what it is. I saw this. Oh, you cheated because I probably told you, Alan. Do you know what it is, Rik?
I do not.
Okay, I saw this in the field in a crack in the wood. Myxo's slime molds like cracks in wood, so I'm always looking with my flashlight, with my light, at cracks in woods. And what I could see is these little tiny, tiny, tiny yellow things that looked like they were on stalks, but I couldn't even tell because they were so tiny. So I packaged it up and took it home. I didn't have a microscope at the time. I just set it up to photograph with a Laowa. This is a shot at 5x with a Laowa. And there's a fair bit of work here to clean this up, I have to say. But so then I saw this and I thought, what in the world is this? It's not a slime mold. I was pretty sure it wasn't a slime mold, and I was pretty sure it wasn't a fungus. So I posted it in some group on Facebook, maybe the California Mushroom ID group, and somebody very quickly told me what it was, which is myxobacteria. So myxobacteria, same thing. Myxo because they glide and they're sort of this gliding sticky substance, almost like plasmodium. Just like Myxos, at some point, these little trees, these little fruiting bodies arise out of the plasmodium, and that makes them better apparently to release the spores for reproducing and better for them to feed. So this is Stigmatella aurantica. One of my favorite stories is when I got this photograph and somebody told me what it was, I thought, I want to go learn some more about whatever this is. And so I looked online and I looked to see if I could find anybody who studies them. And I found a guy at University of California, Davis, which is about an hour and a half from where I live. And I thought, what the heck, I'll just send him this photo and see if he can tell me. I didn't know the ID at the time. I just thought it was a myxobacteria. So I thought I'll send it to him and see if he can confirm it. You know, am I going to hear back from this professor at UC? No. I sent him the photo and I heard something back in 3 minutes. And he said, oh my God, I've never seen a photo of this like this before. This is incredible. Can I put this on my webpage? So it's on his webpage. He studies myxobacteria. Yeah, so this is really cool. It's one of my favorite photos.
Beautiful.
They're again, size-wise, they're tiny. So it depends. So that you can see the little, you can barely see individual fruiting bodies in there, but they're really tiny, really, really tiny.
Well, that's a really big pencil.
Yeah, exactly. This is a field photograph, actually. It's pretty amazing. No, it's not. No, take that back. It's with the larva. This is a slime mold called Prototrichia, and this is kind of cool because you see all parts of the slime mold. So this outer layer, this thin skin with sort of an iridescence on it, is the outer layer that covers what we call the sporocyst, the cyst that holds the spores. That's called the peridium. That's one of the things you have to characterize to get to ID. And then these little threads on the inside, they hold the spores, and that's called the capillicium, or the capillidial threads. And then you actually are seeing spores all along the stem here. Those are individual spores. And then I used this is with the Lauer 5X, and then I used a microscope objective with a not very good background here, and I could see the actual twisting in these capillidial threads, and I could see the individual spores. This is again one of my earlier 10X photos, and it just blew me away when I saw this, that I could photograph stuff this small and see spores was amazing to me.
Alison, do you know anything about how the plasmodium differentiates into all of these different structures? I mean,
nope. Short answer.
Well, that makes 100 of us.
Nope. Okay, here's a fun one. This is actually a fungus, a crust fungus, on a bit of old wood in one of my favorite, used to be one of my favorite hunting places before they cut everything down. I like this little guy over here with the eyes here. So this is another example of what amazing things you can see with a macro lens, because this is what I found in the field. Oh. And it doesn't look very interesting, but then when you put the macro lens on the camera and you look for interesting compositions, you can find something that's really a lot of fun. I just love what you can do with a macro lens. Okay, back to a slime mold. This is a slime mold that I entered last year in a Nikon Small World competition. Yeah, 2021. And I'd heard about that competition a couple of years earlier, and I just was blown away by the stuff that was there. And then last year I thought, okay, well, I'll submit a few photos. It's free. You can submit 3 photos. I'm never going to place, but what the heck. And I was completely blown away to get an email saying that I had placed in the competition. They don't tell you how you place. They send you an email in July and you don't find out until August or September. And they have 3 categories. The top one is called the top 20, which gets most of the publicity. And when they did their release at 7 in the morning on a Monday, I was at my computer refreshing the page. And then I saw that it got number 20 in the top 20. And I just, I screamed. I jumped up and down. So this is a slime mold I grew in the way I described before. It's called Arceria palmiformis. I grew it. It took just a couple of days from when I started putting that piece of wood in what we call a moist chamber. So once it started maturing, I should finish. When you're growing these things, when they start to mature, they change. And as they start to dry out, then you want to take the cover off, because if they're drying out and they're still moist, they're going to get mold. So I took the cover off, I set it aside, I let it dry completely. it still had a lot of the spores in it. So I took a blower, the same kind of blower that you use to clean your camera lens, and I ever so carefully blew out the spores. And so now what you're seeing is the capolidial threads. And if I blow it up here, you can probably see some spores right on the top here.
Alison, do you ever put anything to suppress mold growth in your chambers?
No.
Like,
is there something I could use?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, lots of things that will.
I never thought of that.
Well,
but
yeah.
I wonder if those chemicals would be harmful to the Myxos.
No, something like phenol, just a couple of drops.
Really? Okay, I'll check that out.
I don't know. It might kill Myxos too, but it definitely suppresses mold. When I'm wetting insects, I put a couple of drops of phenol in the humidifying chamber.
But those insects are usually dead, right?
Well, yeah.
Right, but these are still alive when I'm trying to photograph them. So I'll try it.
Yeah, I don't know that it would necessarily kill them. I mean, it's Rik would know.
No, Rik does not. He's highly skeptical of it, however.
Highly skeptical of what? That it would kill the mold?
No, highly skeptical of the general approach. I think it would kill your Myxos as well.
Yeah,
but that's just speculation.
Okay, so the experts I know who grow these, who grow them by the hundreds, they tell me that when they get mold, they use tiny tweezers under the dissecting scope, and if they can pull apart the mold, they do, or, which I do also, or I take away the affected fruiting bodies and hope that the rest of them are okay.
I have an interesting question that came in a while ago, and sort of a good time to ask. Are there any safety issues with working with these inhalation hazards? You know, people freak out when they get mold in their house, and et cetera.
Zero.
Allergies.
Zero.
Okay.
Zero issues. I mean, I'm not sure you want to stuff them up your nose, but they are not harmful to humans. Actually, there is a couple of species of slime molds that are eaten in some traditional Mexican cultures. I think it's Reticularia lycoperdon or something like that, also called caca de luna. I'll let you do the translation there. Moon shit. Some people eat it, they fry it and eat it. I'm not terribly tempted to eat it. That's a larger Myxo, so you actually can get something to eat, but most of these are 1 to 2 millimeters tall, so it's going to take thousands to make even a spoonful. But no, they will not harm you. You can breathe them. You're breathing, and you walk through the woods, you are breathing mushroom spores and Myxo spores all the time as you walk through the woods.
So basically, there are no shots of you out in the woods in a hazmat suit.
Correct. Only if it's a rainproof hazmat suit and I forgot my rain jacket that day.
Yeah. Speaking of out in the woods, we have like four questions, similar questions from different people. Do you do any, I think you said you don't do any rail work or any, stepper motor type stuff out in the woods, but to satisfy the people who keep asking the questions.
Correct. I don't.
Okay.
In the woods, I only take the Olympus with me in the woods. It has internal focus stacking, which I don't use. It has internal focus bracketing, which means it takes the series of bracketed shots. So you tell it where to start, and you tell it a step size, which is a loosey-goosey relative term. It's not numerical, which I don't like, but that's the way it is. And it steps, and you tell it how many photos to take, and it steps through. Now, I give it a very large number, which is way more than I need, and I just watch the viewfinder until it captures everything I want and then some, and then I just hit the shutter button to stop the stacking. So I just tell it I want.
Do you use it at setting 1 for steps?
Generally 2.
Do you have any feel for how long that is?
There is a post on the DP review website. If you search for it, a guy did it. It's certainly a function of your aperture. Mm-hmm. I did some little test experiments. I don't know if you can do this in Zarine. Let me know, Rik, but I think you can. But in Helicon, which is what I did at the time, you can process every second photo, every third photo. So what I did was I did step size 1 for a bunch of stacks, and I looked at every second and every third, which is sort of an approximation of that. And I got down to 2 or 3. I should say in the field, I stack almost everything with 2 f-stops, one wider one and one less wide one. In part largely because of halos. Sometimes one is better than another for reducing halos. Alan just posted a very nice write-up on halos and talks about how to try to get rid of halos. And to some extent, it's the distance between your subject and the background. But with Myxos, I don't always have that luxury. So I tend to shoot 2 different stacks. A lot of times, way more than 2 stacks. I vary the background also. I check the background.
We have Hank with a very interesting question, I think. Do these Myxos fluoresce, and have you tried photographing under UV light?
That's a great question, Hank. I've only seen
Myxos.
I got that. Yeah. Mushrooms certainly fluoresce. There's a lot of really cool mushrooms that fluoresce. I do have a UV light. It's not a very good one, but my birthday is next week, and I asked my husband to get me for my birthday a really terrific UV light. I'm kind of hoping I get one next week.
You know, that's a question a lot of wives ask their husband.
A UV light. Yeah.
All the time I hear it.
That's the one I have.
It's a good one.
Which one is that? Actually, maybe not. I can't.
Jacksman C1. This thing's great.
That's not the one I have. Okay, the one I'm getting is a Conway Fire something. I forget.
Yep, that's nice.
Yeah, so there's a guy named Alan Rockefeller who I do a lot of photography with him. I'll take a moment to actually hear. Alan Rockefeller is an excellent mycologist, also an excellent photographer. And Alan and I will be teaching a 5-day class on mushroom photography next September in northern Wisconsin. So there'll be a link on that in the show notes as well. So if you want to really absorb yourself in photographing mushrooms and, of course, slime molds and learn everything I do, come to that class.
Which university is it at? Is it at a university?
No, it's at a place called Madeline Island School of the Arts.
Oh, okay.
It's on an island, Madeline Island in Lake Superior off the coast of northern Wisconsin. A beautiful, I went to graduate school in Wisconsin and I haven't been back since. So I'm actually really excited about going there.
Well, awesome. Andrew Lamberson says he will be there.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. See you there. I was answering a question, iridescence, fluorescence. So I carry a UV light. There are a couple that fluoresce, but I haven't found any yet. I'm carrying it more for mushrooms and also bugs. Bugs are really cool when they fluoresce, just really cool. Millipedes around here. Not too many. I have photographed mushrooms with and without UV light. I don't have any in my display here. We also have a lot of Western scorpions, very small scorpions. They're great in UV light, but very little in the way of Myxos in UV light. Interesting. Alan, do you want to take a break or just keep going?
No, I mean, okay. I don't.
I'm fine.
Does anybody else want to? Do you need to take a break?
Nope, I'm good.
Your work is fabulous. It's just these can almost be used, I think, as Rorschach images. There are infinite possibilities. In this one that's been on the screen for a while, I just love the top part. It's like a what do they call those generators that do a Van der Graaf generator?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Current, a Van der Graaf generator on top of the core of a nuclear blast or something.
Yeah, so when I'm looking for stuff to photograph, I anthropomorphize a lot. So I'm looking for some feeling and some emotion. I don't want it just to be, this one doesn't have particularly much, but my favorite photograph that I showed you earlier, this one to me has an incredible amount of feeling to it. It's a lot of people see different things. Maybe, Atlas holding the world. I see 2 lovers embracing each other, or a parent and child. But so my favorite photographs tend to be those that have a sort of a emotional feel to them.
Yeah. Oh, that is a killer.
This is pretty cool. This is the tree of life. That's what I call this one, the tree of life. A pretty common slime mold where I live, Didymium squamulosum. I like the roots here. That part, that sort of flat part that's sitting on top of the bit of wood is called the hypothallus. And it's really gorgeous in this species. Where
Is
am I?
that part of it on the end, or is that just some tree sap or something?
Here?
Yeah.
That's not part of it. Yeah. This is a fun little one that I photographed at home. This is Palobolus. It's a fungus. It's growing on a deer poop. I have deer in my yard every day, and they leave their droppings. And herbivore dung is a great substrate to grow both fungus and slime mold. Slime molds take a little longer. Palobolus is really fun to photograph, but they're also really sensitive to light. I don't know how I managed to do this, but most of the time, especially if you put them under a microscope with bright light, they will wilt right away.
Let me ask you one question. Why did you not send that to Nikon?
I didn't think it was good enough.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think that would have won the thing.
I do too.
So clever.
I just didn't think it was technically good enough. Okay, maybe I'll submit it next year. I'll make myself a note. Okay.
It's just
oh, I know why. It's not
just
with a microscope
brilliant.
lens. It's not with a microscope lens.
Oh, it has to be?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Enrico had the best comment on that one.
What'd he say?
Myxo Minions, you know, from the animated Minions cartoon. I love it.
Yeah, it is a very fun one. Oh, so it's just, this is a really cool fungus. That black end is what contains the spores. And with water pressure, the spores are shot out of that black end at it's a ridiculously fast speed. I don't remember the numbers, but it's astonishing how fast. If you look up Palobolus time lapse on YouTube, you can find some pretty awesome photos of it.
Okay, Alan, I think, Alan, you need to have a contest where it's a gallery of Alison shots, and whoever comes up with the best captions.
Sounds good to me.
This one will keep me busy for weeks coming up with captions for this one too.
So I said that slime molds sometimes grow on mushrooms and fungus sometimes grows on slime mold. So these two fruiting bodies are Trichia botrytis. This is one you can tell from a picture because it has these unique markings on the peridium, that outer layer. And the white stuff is a fungus called Polycephalomyces tomentosus. Took me a while to learn that one.
Of course it is.
It's pretty cool. This was actually featured on iNaturalist once for their observation of the week or something like that. Another cool fungus on a leaf. This is probably maybe half a centimeter tall and a centimeter wide, something like that. It's called map fungus. I can't remember its botanical name, but map fungus.
What's the fungus
really
here?
Cool. Well, the whole thing is the fungus. Mostly it's an ascomycete. Mostly it's the black stuff. The spores are in the black stuff, but they somehow mark their territories, which is what those the lines are.
Gosh.
And you can almost see like petals in those black things, and those petals open up, and that's where the spores are released.
That is, you know how Alison, you know how documentaries like Fantastic Fungi, there was a whole section on it. If anyone hasn't seen that documentary, you have to watch.
Yeah, it's cool.
Fantastic.
It's very cool.
How
I've only seen it 4 times.
Yeah, how these organisms possibly communicate to each other through, you know, chemical compounds that go through the soil. And what do you know about any of that?
That's a whole nother 2-hour conversation. Suzanne Simard is the one who basically pioneered that science. She has an excellent book, and she published she started working on this from when she was a kid, and she was working on this in graduate school, and then afterwards when she worked for the National Forest Service in Canada, and she was completely poo-pooed on what she was saying, and ultimately she submitted an article to Nature magazine, and they put it on the cover, and they termed the phrase wood wide web. It's fascinating stuff. I recommend her book, Finding the Mother Tree. Really interesting. This is, you know, kind of a cool slime mold because look at the structure, look at the texture, look at the, and then you get to see a close up. So you're seeing a very thin, very thin, almost translucent outer membrane with some iridescence, and then you see these spores lined up underneath. I mean, it's just awesome that that we can photograph this kind of stuff with digital photography. To me, it's really awesome. So there's the the fruiting body, which is maybe 1 millimeter tall, and there is my scale photo. That is the tip of a small paper clip I'm using there.
How many of these slime mold fruiting bodies have an explosive dispersal of the spores, and how many just fall apart? The ones I caught just fall apart.
Well, none are explosive in the sense of Pilobolus, but some, like this genus, Arceria, okay, those capillitial threads, when they open up, are much larger than the sporocyst itself. So that's the only one I would say is quote unquote explosive. Here's another example of it. This is the same genus, Arceria denudata. So the fruiting bodies are, well, the stalks are the same size, but the top, the sporocyst, is quite a bit smaller than this. But as they grow up, they expand.
And push the spores out.
Yeah. So there's the bottom of the cup called the caliculus, and you can see this folding back of the outer layer, the peridium, and then they don't explode, but they open up. This one has, some slime molds have a common name. This one does, appropriately, cotton candy slime mold, which I think carnival candy, cotton candy slime mold, which I think is pretty cool. This is always kind of fun. This is, it looks like a porcini. Anybody who goes mushroom hunting for edibles will recognize this shape as a porcini mushroom, but it's not a porcini mushroom. It's an itty bitty fungus, itty bitty Gallerina marginata mushroom. I just, when I posted this, people went crazy over it. That's a porcini, that's a porcini. It's not a porcini.
Is that snow or ice under your finger?
Nope, that's probably, yeah, it's part of a crust fungus.
Oh.
It could be lichen, but it looks to me, yeah, I can't quite tell. It could be lichen or it could be fungal.
You wouldn't find any of these things out there when it freezes, right?
I don't know, because it never freezes here. No, I take that back. Sure, because I go to snowmelt and I find slime molds in snowmelt.
Oh, okay.
So let me just say, in snowmelt, if you can do that, you go to literally the very edge of where the snow is melting. And
that would be North Carolina for me.
Okay. And if you're on an area where there's patches of snow melting, and so you go to the very edge, the very crusty edge where the snow is melting, and if there are sticks right at that edge, especially if there's a stick half under the edge, and you gingerly pull it out, there's a good chance you'll find a slime mold on it, or within 5 or 10 feet of the edge of snow. Yeah. Here's kind of a fun example, because this, Alan, is again to your question. So this is another Arceria. So you can see the left guy is baby. He hasn't grown up yet. He doesn't really have his spores completely formed. But the right side is the more grown up one with, I don't want to say explosive, but with the expanded capillitial threads. And you can again see the spores in here, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
Let me look at the time here and let's see, we pick some of my favorites. Just pretty mushroom photos. When I go out into the woods and photograph mushrooms, I pay attention at probably most to 2 things. One is the condition of the mushroom and can I clean it up? My friend Tim and I call it doing mushroom custodial duties. I take tiny tweezers and I take very tiny thin paintbrushes with me to clean off debris off of mushrooms. This was pretty dirty when I found it. I spent probably half an hour cleaning it.
How big is it?
How big is it? I don't have this one is, yeah, it's probably 1/2 centimeter. It's a hemimycena. Yeah, probably 1/2 centimeter, 5 millimeters. What I don't clean in the woods, I clean in Photoshop. I am not against cleaning up spots in Photoshop. And then the other thing I pay attention to is the background. So I want my background to be not in the least bit distracting. So I will try to set up what I think is a good background and take my stack and then look through the stack and see if there's anything distracting. Actually, I should take that back. Usually when I go out into the woods, I set everything up, I clean the scene, I clean the background, I set up my shot, and I do a single shot, usually at f9 or f11, something like that. And that gives me an idea of what the background, if there's anything distracting in the background.
Do you ever use a background of your own?
Absolutely. Not one that I bring with me, but this, for example, I picked up, this is a redwood needle, and I just picked it up, and I use props. So this is reverse tweezers. It's a little hard to see. So you squeeze them and the tweezers open. And so I stuck the needle in there, and because it has this nice part which sits flat. And so it's actually being held by this. And then I positioned it with some moss in the background at a distance far enough away that I got the nice smooth bokeh that I like. I really like smooth bokeh.
Was the mushroom growing on the pine thing, or did you place it on there?
No, it was growing on there.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, it was growing on there.
In the leaf litter on the ground, not
in the leaf litter on the ground. And then I picked it up and positioned it someplace. I also have a tendency to create what I call a studio in the woods. If you're doing this on your hands and knees and bending over for hours at a time, it can be tiresome for your back, especially as we mature, as I like to say. So oftentimes I'll try to find a log that's a bit off the ground. I'm still sitting on the ground, but so at least I don't have to be stooping over on my back the whole time. So yeah, so for this one, I found a log and I put it on top of the log. Things aren't going to change that fast when I'm shooting, so it's okay to, they'll live. It's okay to do that.
This is as good a time as any to address lighting. You said earlier you don't use any lighting in the woods.
Very rarely.
And when you do, it's continuous.
No, in the woods, if I'm going to go back to gear. In the woods, if I'm using lighting, it's one of these just little Ulanzi light panels.
Right.
They have a diffuser around them. I think that wand on the right side is much better than the square on the left. And they also make a larger version of it, but it's inexpensive. It's $40, I think. It's actually really nice. So
does it pulse the light, or just a solid?
It's solid. It can pulse, but it's not what I want.
Okay.
You can change the color, which I don't do. It's actually really good. I have two of those that I use. If I use lighting in the field, that's what I use in the field.
Okay.
In the studio, I use continuous lighting. Rik, I saw something recently where you said you're using continuous lighting more and more. Did I imagine that, or am I thinking right?
No, you probably saw that in connection with my recent purchase of a Canon R7 camera, which has fully electronic shutter. So there's no vibration issues with the camera. I can use it at very high magnification and continuous lighting. You get away with it.
Yeah, and the other issue that a lot of people have, especially my European friends, is a lot of vibration from trucks or people in the apartment below or whatever. I live on bedrock. When I bought my house 30 years ago, I looked at the geological records because I live in earthquake country. So I wanted to be on bedrock. So I live on bedrock at the end of a dead end road. And so there's very little vehicular traffic, and my house is on a concrete slab. So I'm pretty solid, except if I have an earthquake. I'm pretty solid. So I've occasionally used flash, and I often run into problems with flash, and I think that's just lack of experience, to be honest, but the continuous lighting works fine for me.
You've never had any yellowing of these lights?
No, not these. I have had yellowing and flickers with the IKEA Janjo. Yeah, that's what I started with, was those. They're single bulb lights, and I put a ping pong ball, half a ping pong ball as a diffuser in front, and I used that for probably the first year and a half.
Yeah.
And then I found these, maybe even someone mentioned them on your forum, Rik. These are Trond, T-R-O-N-D. The one on the right clips to a table, and the one on the left is, it's just on its own stand. So I was using two of the clip-on ones, and I just bought the stand, the third one, and that's pretty much all I use in the studio.
They're nice lights. Yeah.
They're great. I've never had a problem with them. No yellowing, no flickering, no nothing. They have touch control, so the only problem is occasionally I touch where I shouldn't touch and I change the light, but that's only when I'm setting things up. I think they're great.
Good. And the name was T-R-O-N-D?
T-R-O-N-D. I think I gave you a link for that too.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
I also want to show my extremely fancy diffusion system. Very fancy. This is expensive. Okay, this is half of a plastic jug that had something I got at the hardware store. And it has been like the perfect amount of transparency. It's a great little diffuser. It's, it's only about this big. I cut it and I'm using this, this clamp to hold it. It's a really good little diffuser. For the Lamproderma and other slime molds that are really bright and iridescent, this is often not enough. And then I add another really fancy piece of diffusion, which is tracing paper. Alan, you should add the link, the latest tracing paper you mentioned somewhere.
Yeah,
or maybe
yeah.
it was, somebody mentioned, maybe it was Rick. I
No,
don't
it
remember.
was the
Really
vellum.
thick. Yeah,
The
really
vellum.
thick vellum. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and that is a nod to our friend Bud who did that. Yeah.
So the one on top, I just cut a piece out and folded it in half and put tape on. That's a trick I saw Alan do. And the one on the bottom, I just made with some wire from the hardware store. And I have a few that are shaped kind of like the one on the bottom. So sometimes I'll add those for a second layer of diffusion, which really makes a difference.
Nice.
You got some more questions, Mike, or should I go back to some photos?
There's a couple more. We can bounce around. Did you ever find mushrooms or myxos growing on dead insects or animals?
Yes. In a word, I wonder, yeah, so cordyceps is the most common one, which are mushrooms that grow on insects. I'm actually going to post one for Halloween that actually a friend of mine found. It's ridiculously tiny, but I'm going to post it on Monday for Halloween. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and Alan will put those. Actually, I have a slide at the end that shows them, but Alan will put those in the show notes. But tomorrow I'm going to post one. I'm not drawn to those. I see them sometimes, but this one was really cool, so I did photograph it. But I do see them. I went to the jungle in Colombia about 3 years ago, and I saw tons of them there. Tons.
Do the ants always show up at the top of the plants? Do they climb up to the very top when the cordyceps rots their brain?
No, because the cordyceps that I found were the ants. Well, by the time the cordyceps have grown pretty well, the ants are dead at that point. And the only ones I photographed at home were plenty dead. The insects were plenty dead.
Got it.
Got another one here from Paul Daly. Related to the focus rail in the field, he says, I saw a shot with a low position tripod that looked great. Who makes it?
Okay. I have a Manfrotto tripod. I don't remember the number. I can give it. I think, Alan, I gave you, maybe if I didn't, I'll give you the link. I bought this tripod 12 years ago when I first got a real camera. I was doing landscape photography, so it needed to be sturdy, so it's on the heavy side. But one thing that's really cool about that Manfrotto is that the center post flips to become horizontal. So I would say 99% of the time when I'm in the woods shooting, I'm using the Manfrotto with the center post in the horizontal position. So between that and the horizontal position and being able to angle the legs out any direction I want, I can get pretty much any angle I want and almost as low as I want. There are other tripods. So I thought about getting a new tripod that would go where the legs would go completely flat. Mine go almost flat, but not completely. But the ones that go completely flat, you're still sitting your camera on top of the middle of the tripod and it's too high. So I looked at a whole bunch of other tripods and decided what I have actually works really well.
Have you ever considered using a platypus?
I have, but sort of the same issue. You still have to sit the camera up at a certain angle. So you can't put your camera upside down, hanging it up from the tripod, which I sometimes do. Yeah, I don't know if the platypus, well, I guess my Olympus is not very heavy. I haven't tried it.
I haven't either, but I know people who like them just swear by them for this kind of stuff, forest floor stuff.
We have one of our viewers, Leo, jumped into the chat. He says he uses the Manfrotto 055 that can do the horizontal post. He says he loves it. It's a game changer.
Yeah, I'm not sure mine's 055, but it's a Manfrotto and it's terrific with the horizontal post because you can get to any height and any angle. It's really good.
Yeah. Bud's also asking, what's the maximum mag that you use?
In the field, well, at home on the studio, I've got up to 5x with the Laowa and 10x with the microscope objective. I am dreaming of getting a 20x microscope objective, but A, it costs a lot of money, and B, I'm trying to do microscopy too. Yeah, and B, it costs a lot of money. I sell prints, and I use the money I make from prints and selling photos to magazines and other publications. I use all that to buy gear, but that's a lot of prints I have to sell to get that, and also takes a lot of time. At some point, I'm pretty sure I'll get a 20x, but I'm not there yet.
I have two aesthetic questions for you, but I'm sorry.
Let me just finish the magnification in the field. Yeah. With the Olympus, using extension tubes and the Raynox 250, I can get to close to 5x in the field. There is definitely a loss of image quality, and I'm very excited that Olympus is releasing a new 2x lens for Micro Four Thirds cameras sometime next year. So when you add the Raynox and extension tubes on that, that's going to be a lot more magnification. I'm totally jazzed for that lens. Okay, Mike.
Okay, this is about aesthetics. You know, we spent so much time on your technical prowess and the gear and the lighting and all that. But, you know, as soon as I saw the first pictures you ever did, you know, months ago, it just struck me that this is art here. You know, there's just something, there's a whole other level of it. And I was just wondering, like, do you have any formal training in photography and composition, or what other photography did you, because they're beautifully balanced shots, and you just don't go out there and do that. You have to kind of know what you're setting up.
Thank you, Mike. I am a nerd. I am a mathematician by training. I have zero art training. I went to art museums as a kid, but I have zero art training and zero artistic skills. But somehow in photography, it seems to have worked out okay. You only see the photos that I post. You don't see all the ones that I throw away. So when I first started doing this, I just spent a lot of time looking at other people's macro photographs and noting what I liked and what I didn't like. And then I criticized my own photographs very heavily. I still do that, what I like and what I don't like. And just over time, I've gradually sort of come upon, this is pretty typical for me, the one you're seeing a photo now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. This is pretty typical for me. I really, you know, most people say they recognize my photos. I try to have a very smooth, soft, bokeh is the term, background, so that your attention is on the subject, in this case, young Craterium slime molds. And I don't know, I just look for compositions that feel good to me. That's the best way I can describe it. You know, I know when I get something in the lens and I've sort of found something that works, I smile. Something moves inside me and says, that's it. That's a good shot. Do that. But yeah. No artistic training.
So you mentioned you sell your images from your website, but have you ever had a gallery show? Because I think these would be great for that.
A slight correction. I should have a website. I don't have a website. It's a little embarrassing when people want a website and I give them an Instagram link. It's on my list of things to do, but again, I would just rather spend my time doing the photography. So I haven't done that. I don't have a website. So if people want photographs, they just contact me through Facebook or Instagram. And I did actually have a show in my local library, the little tiny library in my town, maybe 4 years ago. I spent a ridiculous amount of time on it. I sold maybe 2 photos. I didn't do it to sell. I just did it because it was kind of fun. It did get a lot of attention. I got written up in the local newspaper, which was kind of cool. And for one reason or another, things started to take off after that. I don't know why, but they just did. Yeah. Actually, that's another fun story. How things took off. I was having dinner with one of my best friends, Julia, and we're having dinner at a restaurant in Berkeley. And I was talking about, as I like to do, my mushroom photography and how much I've been enjoying it. And I had I guess at that point I'd been posting on Instagram for, I don't know, maybe a year or something like that. And I was telling her about Steve Axford, some of the Australians on here and others might know him. He's a very good mushroom photographer, also does slime molds occasionally. And he was definitely an early influence for me. And Steve had, I remember reading an article about Steve and he said he was just doing it for fun. And then he got his photos in Colossal, which is a website, a terrific arts website, and everything, everything skyrocketed for him from there. And I remember looking at Julia and saying that, yeah, that would be really cool to be in Colossal. That would be so cool. Never in my wildest dream. And that night, that literally 3 hours later, I came home and I got an email from a friend and she said, go on Colossal, look, your mushrooms are on Colossal. Which was astounding to me. So they never contacted me. They just put them, and 3 hours. I mean, I still have goosebumps thinking about it. It was really amazing to me. And that is actually same as Steve. Things did take off after that. I got a lot of internet and other publications after that. Let's look at a couple of photos.
Story.
This is there's a fungus we have here called bleeding heart fungus, which has these guttation drops. These little drops are called guttation. It's kind of like the sweat of the mushroom. But as it's older, it has these red drops. But this is a tiny, tiny, tiny baby one. It's 2 millimeters tall. It just has this amazing set of textures, which I really love. Down here, we call these teeth on the fungus. And the spores actually grow on, I think, right here, the spores grow outside on those teeth.
That's just hideous.
Thank you.
In the nicest possible way. It looks like a fried egg, and
yeah, like a poached egg fell on something.
I think it's pretty cool myself. It's a slime mold. This is with the microscope objective. The lighting isn't great here. You can tell that it's lit. I try not to make it look like it's lit, but I just thought the I don't know, the texture here, the pattern, the detail is pretty amazing, and it has iridescence here. It's a reduced photo. There we go. It has iridescence, a lot of, and then this amazing texture, just amazing texture, these crinkles. And this was brought to me by a friend. It was on some plants, some spinach leaves in their garden. And there's the leaf it was on. There's a whole cluster of them. So 2 of them are from that leaf. The photo I just showed you.
Is the color that you're seeing, is that structural refringence or something, or are they actually colored parts of the?
Are you talking about the iridescence or the blue? The iridescence.
No, not the blue. The sparkly colors at the bottom.
The sparkly color is iridescence, which is not a pigment. It's structural. It's the reflections of the light.
Got it.
Yeah. So anyway. It's one of the 2 fruiting bodies. It might be, I can't remember which one, but I didn't point here, but it's one of the 2 fruiting bodies on this leaf. It's a spinach leaf from a friend's garden. Oh, I want to add here, there's so many cool things about Myxos. And one of the many cool things about them is that this leaf, when I photographed it, I'd had it for probably 4 months. So once the Myxos dry, as long as you take good care of them and don't put them in a lot of moisture or don't touch them on the top, they will retain. I shot this 2 years ago and I still have it. It looks exactly like that 2 years later.
Once they dry, boxes you put them in.
Oh yes. Good point. Once they dry, they retain their color, their structure, their shape, everything perfectly. And I actually have been I've been working with a couple of researchers. So I have some academic collections I've been photographing, and one has a specimen that's 100 years old. It was a 1917 specimen, and it's still in great shape. So I travel. I've been to Alaska, I've been to Colombia, I've been to other places. So if you want to bring Myxos home, the thing that most people who study Myxos do is they get these tiny little boxes, which are like matchboxes. In Australia, you can actually buy matchboxes, but here I have not been able to find them. So there's a company that makes these little boxes. So the trick is you make this U-shaped piece, basically a file card, a heavy paper file card. You cut it out into this U shape that fits perfectly in the box, so that the height of the vertical height is exactly the same as the box. you take your Myxo and you on the substrate and you glue it, Elmer's glue, any glue to the paper, stick that in the box. So, and then close the box. So now it's glued to the box because of that card goes up to the top. If you do this, it won't move. If you do this, it won't move. If you do this, it won't move. So when I typically go on a trip, I just put a little tiny label. Well, you can't see the label. It's okay. I put a little tiny label. I get color coded. The colors to me mean how excited I am about photographing them when I get home. I put a little label with just the date and what I think it is, but I've also always have my notebook so I can cross-reference in my notebook more information. So here's an example of something from a trip. So it's on this little card. Part of it just fell off. It's on this little card, glued, so I can turn it upside down, glued to the substrate. So you can't quite see it because it's really tiny, but there's some white didymium on there. And then
the boxes that you're using are porous, they're card. Is that important? Is there a reason you don't seal them in a plastic box or something?
Well, theoretically, this should be, practically, this has to be completely dried. So, and then some people.
Excuse me, Alison.
Yeah.
You're showing a lot of little things. How about stopping sharing so
Sure.
people can see your image larger?
Good point. Good point, Mike. Thank you. I forgot about that. Did I stop?
Yeah, Alan, do you want to make Alison larger in the frame?
Yeah, I think if we yeah.
I think you can pin her image maybe, or
I think so, yeah.
I can do it too.
I did it.
Okay.
Okay, to me, I'm small, but you guys are seeing
I
me
can
large.
see you're small.
Okay, so there's my little file card with the slime mold on it. It's actually, I don't know if you can see, it's Physarum bivalve, probably hard to see. So it fits snugly into this little box. So before I go on a trip, I cut out all those U-shaped pieces. It takes me a long time. I cut them out, put them in the box, and I have a little container that has dozens of these boxes. And then, as I said, in the field, oops, put that one upside down. In the field, I don't know if you can read anything on there.
Yep.
Maybe, yeah. So I say the date and what I think it is. And then what you should do, but I haven't done yet because there's only so many hours in the day, when you want to sort of store them permanently, you put them in the freezer, usually for a week or two, to destroy any critters in there that might be eating them up. And then you type a label. So this is from Steve Stevenson, who's a guy that I'm doing photographs for. So this label has the collection number, the species name, a GPS coordinates, what the substrate was, what the species is, other relevant information. And then that's, of course, in a database.
Very cool.
Let me show a couple other props that are useful for the field. Tweezers, very useful to, as I said, to pick off. I use these almost every photo I do to pick off bits of dust, to move things out of the background. These I got for probably $6 on Amazon. They're nice fine point tweezers. I mentioned I use one of these reverse tweezers for holding things. I also use potato bag chip holders to hold things. Sometimes you can prop it up like that on a log and then hold the twig in it. I take a spray bottle with me if things, if the substrate's not wet enough, or for whatever reason I need to wet something or keep it wet, or when I'm taking stuff home in my box, I spray the filter paper before I put the Myxo in my collection box.
Just water?
This just distilled water. This fits, or rainwater if I can collect some. This fits in my camera pack. If I'm really going out and collecting a lot, I use just an ordinary tackle box, just fishing tackle box. Mushroom collectors use these all the time. I think those are most of my props.
Speaking of boxes, everybody's asking, where do you get the little boxes?
I will give Alan the link. It's a company called Papermate, I think. I'll give Alan the link for the show notes. I should say they're not cheap. They're like 50 cents a box. So It adds up, but they have lots of different sizes, but they work terrifically.
GS Tan, she's asking, are all your shots in RAW, or do you do maybe JPEG and any imaging techniques that would relate to the format?
Good question. And hi, I follow her on Instagram. I do everything in RAW. And Rik, do you do everything in RAW?
It depends. My usual concern is not the photographic quality of the final image, but rather what information I can learn about the subject. So I'm more curious than I am interested in the aesthetics, and I often shoot JPEG for deep high magnification stacks. 200, 300, 400 frames. I'll shoot those in JPEG. Any place where I do not have perfect control over the illumination, that should get shot in RAW.
Yeah, so which links to the main reason why I shoot in RAW, because if I need to do some fine tuning of the colors, you can't really do that in JPEG.
Right.
Yeah. So when you're shooting the really high magnification stuff, you're not
That's in
worried
studio, and I have total control over the
Okay.
illumination, and I always do a custom color balance off a gray card,
Okay.
because the color balance will change with the particular diffuser that you're using.
Right. Right. I have to show my shirt. I have a slime mold shirt. Whoops.
A slime mold shirt. Oh, wow. You gave me the link for that, right? Oh, you muted yourself.
The USB cord must have come out. Oh, no.
There's a red button, a red light on your microphone. That should be it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I just unplugged and plugged again. That's Ernst Haeckel, I think, who's had this astonishing drawings that he did.
Where did you buy it, or did you have it made?
I bought that T-shirt. Actually, my husband bought that T-shirt for me for my birthday once. Doesn't every wife ask her husband for a slime mold T-shirt for her birthday?
Just about, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I can give you a link for that.
Good, please.
Well, Alan,
yeah,
we have really gone through just about every question here, which I think is great. Everybody got a chance.
Well, I'll tell you what. Seeing as we're closing in on 6, I'm gonna give the floor to Alison to show us the pictures that she's been holding in reserve for the end. So we'll finish up with a grand finale.
Just a few more pictures. Where's my share screen?
You should be able to. Do I have to no, I don't.
No,
Can
there
you
go.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're going to skip through some. Okay, this little fellow is 30 years old. Another example of they retain everything. It's just astonishing. 30 years sitting in a box.
Good grief.
Rhizarum galbium is its name, from somewhere in Northern California in the 70s. This is from a snowmelt area. It's a really cute little fungus called Capitotricha bicolor. They're like little eggs, some people think, but they have these hairs. They're just gorgeous. Oh, so this is an interesting one. This is very common in snowmelt areas, and I photographed them in the field, but the detail wasn't as good as I wanted, but they were dry by the time I got home, of course. But some of these tiny ascomycetes, you can re-wet them and they will go back to their former glory. So in this case, I re-wet them and then shot them with the Lauer. Okay, some of the really pretty slime molds, sometimes they have this web between the stalks. A couple of species in particular have that quite commonly. And in here, again, you can see most of that outer layer, the peridium is gone, and you're seeing those threads, the capillicium on the inside. Some more gorgeously iridescent ones. These are Comatrica fusiformis, which I found for the first time this year. Just amazing iridescence.
That's awesome. Looks like those Tiffany vases from back in the 20s.
Oh, yeah, the colors. This is a really, really, really tiny Myxo. This one is less than 0.5 millimeter tall. It was a royal pain in the butt to photograph and get the lighting right, and I'm still not that happy with it, but it's It's really, I just think it's really pretty. Another iridescent Lamproderma, these crystals are these white crystals. This species is called Lamproderma arcerioides. And there are a few other, excuse me, Lamproderma species that have these needle-like crystals on them. And there's an Instagram account called Eye of Science, and he's asked me to send him a couple of these fruiting bodies because this guy does scanning electron microscopy. So he's going to do SEM on the needles, which I think will be really fun to see what they look like. Some more tiny, tiny little cup fungi and a scale photo.
Yeah.
They're tiny. Some more really pretty iridescent Lamproderma, just amazing. These are, I'm not, excuse me, I am not pushing up the saturation or the vibrance or anything. These are the actual colors, just astonishingly gorgeous.
Wow. Are Lamproderma specifically a Northern California species?
Nope.
Wow.
Worldwide. Most slime mold species are worldwide. There are some that are mostly in the tropics. There are some that are, you know, there's a bunch that I'd love to see that are in the eastern United States, hint, hint, Alan, but not in the not in the western United States. This is kind of a fun one.
What are those white things on the Lamproderma?
Those white things, yeah, those are similar to the needles here. There's some sort of, it's usually calcium carbonate lime that's on here, and these are similar but just smaller. It's a different species. Let's see, we're running out of time. Another really pretty Lamproderma. Just fascinating structure. Just I don't know that I can't blow this up very much because I had to crop it very, very, very heavily. But you can, I mean, you can still see the round little blobs or the spores pushing up the against the edge of that outer layer. Okay, here's a bizarre one. This is from the Philippines, maybe, it's July 2014. So this is from a graduate student of Steve Stevenson, and he's been sending me stuff to photograph. They look like medieval clubs or something. This is the most bizarre structure I've seen from a slime mold. These are also about 1 millimeter tall. Very, very, very tiny. Another species, genus that has gorgeous iridescence, it's called Diachia. Really cool stuff. This is from the Philippines. And another tiny, tiny one. This one is 0.3 millimeters tall. Ridiculously tiny. I struggled with this one. This was where I really need a 20x lens, but it's still, I'm actually pretty happy with the way this one came out.
What's it growing out of?
It's growing on a liverwort. It's a dried liverwort.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
This one was the second one that I had that placed in the Nikon Small World this year. This was an honorable mention. It looks like these little crystals, these sugar, look like sugar on top. Somehow this has me thinking of Alice in Wonderland when I look at this photo. It just makes me smile. It's kind of cool. And oops, why did you do that? Where'd you go? This one. Okay. And it this one was at a friend's yard. She has some nice conditions in her yard, and it was on a bit of plant matter in her yard. This is the same species, but on the edge of a leaf. That's the tip of a leaf. It's called the Dymium clavis, and there's the leaf with the tip showing the slime molds on it. And two more. This is just a stunning color called Physarum roseum. Does not grow in my neck of the woods. I don't think it's been found in the United States. Again, it was lent to me by a collector. It's just a stunning color. And my last photo is Alan's favorite, which is back to the iridescent, bubbly Lamproderma.
That is beautiful.
This was on the very same leaf as the original photo that I showed you. After that heavy storm last year, I found this one leaf. When I found it in the woods, they were young. This is a case where I got lucky. They were young, they were black, just shiny, black, wet, very immature slime molds. And I suspected they might be Lamproderma. So I hung around there for quite a while I was photographing other things. I tucked them into my little box in my usual way and took the leaf home, carrying it ever so carefully. And when I got home, it had already started to dry out, and it turned into these gorgeous slime molds. So there were several dozen on a leaf, and I got 3 really good photos out of the same leaf.
Is there anything specific about the morphology that's making two of these green and one blue? I mean, does that have significance?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I was actually surprised to see this myself. I'm assuming it's the same species, but it's possible it's two different species. It is quite common for multiple species to be, in the same small bit of wood or leaflet or whatever. A lot of times you'll even find them, mixed in together. So it could be, I think they're the same species, Physarum Lamproderma scintillans, but I'm not for sure.
Could it just be
Alison?
drying at different rates or something like that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Mike?
Fascinating.
Yeah, a question. So in the overall biome, in the big scheme of things, what are slime molds there for? And about how long have they been around?
They're there for me to go find them and photograph them. Isn't that what they're there for?
That's a very scientific answer. Thank
okay,
you.
I think that I remember reading recently that there was a specimen of amber or something from 40,000 years ago where they found a Stemonitis slime mold in it. So they've been around for a long time. They do have a role in ecology. They eat bits of, they help decompose things because they eat bits of bacteria, yeast, algae, fungi. They don't eat wood, so they're not wood decomposers, but they eat bits of stuff that's on wood, and they provide food for certain animals, slugs, mites, other kinds of beetles. Beetles like them a lot.
Is the Plasmodium chemotactic, does it follow a food trail?
It's yes and no. It's looking for food. Okay, so that fan out shape is it's fanning out in every direction looking for food. And then if it finds something, if say this part of the fan finds food, these fan parts will shrivel up and they'll all go to that other one. You can find all kinds of stuff on the web about intelligence of slime molds, and there's the classic one about if you put slime molds in a maze and put oatmeal. They like bits of oat. I should say, if you're growing slime molds in a box, get your Quaker oatmeal or whatever you grow in your country and put them in there. The slime molds will gravitate it towards that oatmeal. It's the best food to use. So anyway, if you put a piece of oatmeal in a maze, it'll go all around through the maze and it'll find it. And then you take the slime mold out and you put it in the maze again, it will find the most direct path to the oatmeal. Pretty cool.
Are there any medicinal uses of these or other compounding uses? That's my absolute last question. And tagging on to that, have you ever found yourself hallucinating from touching these things?
Well, medicinal purposes, to me, it's very meditative and healing to my soul to be out in the woods looking for these things. But medicinal purposes, no. Mushrooms, yes, but Myxos, no. I don't know of any medicinal purposes that humans are using slime molds except for the caca de luna. Do I ever hallucinate?
Hard to tell.
Yeah. Good answer, Alan. Hard to tell. Yeah.
Listen, we have run over. Alison, that was absolutely fantastic. I mean, just so engrossing. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking the time. Rik, thanks for being here and keeping us all honest. Mike, thank you for keeping everything flowing. And thanks to everybody for your patience at the beginning of the meeting. I am sorry again about the mix-up. I'll figure out what happened, and but anyway, it was fantastic. I appreciate all of you. I will get this up tonight, I hope, as a recording on YouTube, and I'll send out a notice to everybody so that you can watch it again and see all these cool pictures again. So
I can't even keep track of all the kudos and comments. They're coming in so
I
quickly.
see them coming by.
Everybody loves it. Great job, Alison.
Thank you. I can't see them, so will I see them
we'll keep
later?
the chat.
Yeah,
we'll keep it, and you can read all of them at your leisure.
Yeah, and I recommend that people go to the Facebook slime mold group to post stuff. My Instagram and Facebook accounts will be on Alan's links. I'm always happy to answer questions, photography and otherwise, if people message me nicely. Some people are kind of weird, but if you ask me nicely, I will almost always help people with slime mold questions and photography questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody.